Zixtal pressed his scaled fingers against the smooth control panel of the Seeker of Truth and watched the stars drift past the observation window. The young Kethvar officer had been on duty for 6 hours monitoring deep space communications, but nothing interesting ever happened during his shifts. His people were explorers and diplomats who avoided trouble whenever possible. Fighting was something primitive species did when they could not think of better solutions. The alarm that suddenly filled the bridge caught everyone by surprise. Captain Vorthak moved quickly to the main display where flashing symbols showed. An incoming distress signal. The message came from somewhere in the empty space between star systems where no ship should be traveling alone. Zixtal adjusted the receivers and listened as broken words came through the static. "This is Captain Jake Martinez of the Liberty's Edge, requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by unknown vessels and have taken critical damage to our engines and life support systems. Our position is coordinates 749 Mark 862. Any ship receiving this message, please respond." The bridge crew looked at each other with uncertainty. The Kethvar had never heard of this species before, but the desperation in the voice was clear even through the translation device. Captain Vorthak studied the long-range sensors and saw the energy signatures of a battle happening exactly where the message said it would be. "Set course for those coordinates," Vorthak ordered. "Maximum safe speed." Zixtal felt his stomach twist with nervousness as their ship changed direction. The Kethvar had advanced shields and weapons, but they never looked for fights. Their philosophy was simple. When dangerous predators appeared, the smart choice was to run away and let someone else deal with the problem. But something about the distress call made it impossible to ignore. The journey took 2 hours, and when they arrived, the scene was worse than anyone expected. A small ship drifted helplessly in space with massive holes torn through its hull. Debris floated everywhere, and several smaller vessels that looked like attack fighters were moving away toward a much larger ship in the distance. The attackers were leaving because they thought their work was finished. "Scan the damaged vessel," Captain Vorthak commanded. "Are there survivors?" The science officer worked quickly at his station. "I detect 43 life signs, Captain. The ship appears to be completely disabled, but the beings inside are still alive. Their atmosphere is leaking, but they have perhaps 1 hour before conditions become fatal." Zixtal studied the readings and felt confused. The damaged ship was much smaller than the Seeker of Truth, but it had clearly been fighting against the entire fleet of enemy vessels. Why would such a tiny crew pick a fight they could never win? The logical choice would have been to surrender immediately and hope for mercy. "The attacking vessels are moving away," reported the tactical officer. "They appear to be Ravager pirates. Based on their ship designs, they probably think everyone aboard the damaged ship is already dead. Everyone on the bridge knew about Ravagers. They were one of the most feared species in this part of the galaxy. Brutal raiders who enslaved entire planets and sold the survivors to whoever would pay the highest prices. The Kethvar had avoided Ravager territory for good reasons. These creatures respected only violence and treated mercy as weakness. Captain Vorthak made his decision quickly. "Bring the survivors aboard immediately. Medical teams to Transport Bay 3. Security teams on standby, but keep weapons powered down. These beings just survived a Ravager attack, so they will probably be frightened." The rescue operation took 30 minutes. Zixtal watched through the internal cameras as strange creatures were carried into their medical bay. The humans were much smaller than Kethvar and had soft pink skin instead of protective scales. They looked fragile and weak, but the ones who could still walk helped carry their injured friends. Even after losing their ship and barely escaping death, they worked. Together without arguing or panicking, the human leader was brought directly to the bridge. Captain Jake Martinez was a middle-aged male with short gray hair and tired eyes. His uniform was torn and burned, but he stood straight when he spoke to Captain Vorthak. "Thank you for rescuing my people," Martinez said through the translation device. "We were not sure anyone would hear our distress call in this empty region of space." Vorthak gestured for the human to sit down. "What happened to your ship, Captain Martinez? Why were you fighting Ravager pirates with such a small vessel?" Martinez looked out the main window toward the wreckage of his ship. "We were escorting a civilian transport to the outer colonies when the Ravengers attacked. The transport escaped, but we stayed behind to buy them time. Someone had to make sure those families reached safety." Zixtal felt his scales change color, with shock. This small human crew had deliberately fought an entire Ravager fleet, knowing they would probably die. They chose certain destruction to protect strangers they would never see again. The concept made no sense to his logical Kethvar. "Mind, your sacrifice saved many lives," Vorthak said respectfully. "Now we must focus on getting you and your crew to safety." The conversation was interrupted by urgent alarms from the sensor station. The tactical officer looked up with fear in his large eyes. "Captain, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive fleet of ships approaching our position. Energy signatures match Ravager designs. They will be here in less than 4 hours." The news about the approaching Ravager fleet sent waves of panic through the Kethvar crew. Zixtal watched his fellow officers change colors from their normal blue-green to the pale yellow that meant extreme fear. Everyone knew what Ravengers did to prisoners. Death would be merciful compared to slavery in their mining colonies. Captain Vorthak immediately ordered the navigation officer to plot a course away from the enemy fleet. "Calculate the fastest route to hyperspace jump distance," he commanded. "We need to leave this system before they arrive." But the response was not what anyone wanted to hear. "Captain, our hyperspace engines are still cooling down from the journey. Here, we cannot make another jump for at least 6 hours. The Ravager fleet will reach us in 4 hours." Zixtal felt his heart beating faster as he realized what this meant. The Seeker of Truth was trapped with nowhere to run. Their only choices were surrender or fight against impossible odds. Neither option offered much hope for survival. Captain Martinez stepped forward and spoke quietly to Vorthak. "Captain, we need to talk. My people and I want to help you prepare for what is coming." Vorthak looked confused. "Help us prepare. Captain Martinez, your ship is destroyed and most of your crew is wounded. You cannot fight anymore." The human smiled in a way that made Zixtal feel uncomfortable. "Captain, you saved our lives when you could have ignored our distress call. Now Ravengers are coming for you because you helped us. My people do not abandon friends who risk themselves for others." Within an hour, the strangest sight Zixtal had ever witnessed was happening throughout the ship. Human survivors were working alongside Kethvar crew members to prepare for battle. Even the wounded humans who could barely walk insisted on helping with whatever tasks they could manage. Sergeant Tony Rivers was a tough-looking human male with scars on his arms and a deep voice. He moved through the weapons storage areas, showing Kethvar officers how to use human energy rifles that had been salvaged from the Liberty's Edge. His patience impressed Zixtal because the Kethvar were clearly struggling to understand the simpler human technology. "The key is not to think too much about aiming," Rivers explained to a group of nervous Kethvar. "Point and shoot. These weapons are designed for combat, not precision target practice. When Ravengers start boarding this ship, you will not have time for careful calculations." In the engineering sections, Amy Foster was working with Kethvar technicians to combine their different technologies. The young human female had burns on her hands from the battle, but she ignored the pain while rerouting power systems. Her technical knowledge seemed impossible for someone so young. "Your energy shields are amazing," she told the Kethvar engineers. "But they are designed to stop energy weapons. Ravengers also use kinetic projectiles and boarding charges. We need to modify the shield frequencies to handle multiple attack types." Dr. Lisa Wong had taken charge of the medical preparations with an efficiency that amazed the Kethvar medical staff. The small human female moved between patients, both human and alien, while organizing supplies and treatment areas. She worked without stopping, even though she had been awake for more than 20 hours. "We need to prepare for battlefield injuries," she explained to the Kethvar doctors. Ravengers use weapons designed to cause maximum pain and suffering. Traditional medical approaches will not be sufficient during combat conditions, Zixtal found, himself assigned to help with tactical planning in the main conference room. Captain Martinez was showing Vorthak and the senior officers diagrams of typical Ravenger attack patterns. The information was detailed and obviously came from extensive combat experience. They always start with intimidation, Martinez explained, threatening messages and warning shots to make you surrender without fighting. If that fails, they send waves of small fighters to test your defenses. The real attack comes when they launch boarding pods directly at your ship. Captain Vorthak studied the diagrams with growing concern. Our defensive systems are not designed for this type of close-quarters combat. We have always relied on our superior speed to avoid dangerous situations, Martinez nodded grimly. Speed will not help you now, Captain. The only choice is to make them pay such a high price for this ship that they decide to look for easier targets elsewhere. The planning session continued for 2 more hours, while the countdown to the Ravenger arrival continued. Zixtal listened, as the humans described tactics that seemed insanely aggressive to his logical mind. They talked about deliberate sacrifices and acceptable losses, as if these concepts were normal parts of battle. What disturbed him most was how calm the humans remained while discussing their own possible deaths. They spoke about worst-case scenarios and last-resort options without showing any of the fear that was consuming the Kethvar crew. Either these creatures were too stupid to understand the danger, or they had something the Kethvar had lost during their evolution toward civilization. Engineer Pete Johnson was a quiet human male who usually worked in the ship maintenance areas. But now he was checking weapons and equipment with the same careful attention he gave to mechanical repairs. When Zixtal asked him how he could be so calm, the human gave an answer that would stay with him forever. "Fear is normal," Johnson said, simply. "Everyone gets scared when death comes looking for them. The difference is what you do with that fear. You can let it control you, or you can use it to make sure you do not waste the time you have left." As the final hour approached, before the Ravenger fleet arrived, Zixtal realized something that changed. His understanding of evolution and intelligence. His people had spent thousands of years developing technology and philosophy to avoid dangerous situations. They had become so good at running away from problems that they had forgotten how to stand and fight for things that mattered. The humans had kept something the Kethvar had lost. Not just courage, but the willingness to die for others, even when those others were complete strangers. These small, fragile creatures were about to teach an entire ship of advanced beings what real strength looked like. The alarm sounded again as long-range sensors detected the Ravenger fleet dropping out of hyperspace. Captain Vorthak looked around the bridge at his mixed crew of Kethvar and humans. "All stations report ready," he announced. "Whatever happens in the next few hours, we face it together." Zixtal felt his scales changing to colors he had never seen before as the enemy. Ships appeared on the main display. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what the word fear meant. The Ravenger fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of deadly insects. Zixtal counted 12 large warships and at least 50 smaller attack vessels spreading out in a hunting formation around the Seeker of Truth. The enemy ships were dark and angular with weapon ports glowing red along their hulls. Everything about their design was built for destruction and intimidation. Captain Vorthak received the first communication within minutes of their arrival. The Ravenger commander appeared on the main screen as a massive creature with 4 arms and rows of sharp teeth. His voice was like grinding metal when he spoke through the translation system. "Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in Ravenger territory. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Your crew will be processed for slave markets, and your ship will be added to our fleet. You have 5 minutes to comply, or we will destroy you." The bridge fell silent as everyone waited for Captain Vorthak to respond. The logical choice was obvious to any reasonable being. 12 warships against 1 exploration vessel was not a battle, it was suicide. The smart decision was to surrender and hope for mercy, even though Ravengers were not known for showing mercy to anyone. But before Vorthak could answer, Captain Martinez stepped forward and activated the communication system himself. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, without any trace of fear or uncertainty. "This is Captain Jake Martinez representing the combined crews of the Liberty's Edge and the Seeker of Truth. We do not recognize Ravenger territorial claims in this region of space. If you want our ship, you are welcome to try taking it, but I guarantee you will pay a price higher than you expect." The Ravenger commander showed his teeth in what might have been surprise or amusement. "Foolish creature, we have 12 warships, and you have one damaged exploration vessel. Your deaths will be slow and painful as an example to others who dare to defy us." Martinez smiled back at the alien predator with an expression that made Zixtal feel cold inside. "Commander, you have 12 warships today. The question is, how many you will have tomorrow morning? I suggest you consider that before you make your final decision." The transmission ended, and alarms immediately began sounding throughout the ship as Ravenger fighters moved into attack positions. Zixtal watched the tactical display and felt his courage drain away as red symbols surrounded their single green dot. The mathematics of the situation were simple and terrifying, but the humans reacted differently to the approaching danger. Instead of panic or despair, they became more focused and determined. Sergeant Rivers moved through the ship checking defensive positions and encouraging both human and Kethvar crew members. His confidence seemed impossible given their hopeless situation. "Remember what we talked about," Rivers called out to the mixed teams manning the weapon stations. Ravengers rely on fear and intimidation. They expect easy victories against scared enemies. Today, they are going to learn what happens when they pick a fight with beings who refuse to be intimidated. The first wave of enemy fighters began their attack run against the Seeker of Truth. Energy beams and explosive projectiles lit up the space around the ship as the defensive systems engaged multiple targets simultaneously. Zixtal watched human and Kethvar gunners working together at weapons they had barely learned to operate. Pilot Dan Collins had somehow managed to adapt to Kethvar targeting systems in just a few hours of training. The young human male operated his defensive turret with smooth precision while calling out enemy positions to other gunners. His skill seemed impossible for someone using alien technology for the first time. "Fighter group approaching from port side," Collins announced calmly. "Looks like they are trying to overwhelm Sector 7 defenses. Adjusting fire to intercept." The coordinated defensive fire destroyed 6 enemy fighters in the first attack wave, but more were already moving in to replace them. The Ravenger strategy was becoming clear. They would use their smaller ships to wear down the defenses before sending in larger vessels for the killing blow. Dr. Wong had established emergency medical stations throughout the ship to treat casualties as they occurred. The human doctor moved between injured crew members with steady hands while explosions shook the hull around her. Her calm professionalism in the face of chaos impressed even the experienced Kethvar medical staff. "Bring him to Station 4, Wong called out as another wounded defender was carried past. "That injury looks worse than it is. Clean the wound and apply synthetic tissue patches. He will be back in action within an hour." The second wave of Ravenger. Fighters attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Several enemy projectiles penetrated the defensive grid and struck the hull directly. Damage reports began flooding in from various sections of the ship as systems failed and compartments lost atmosphere. Zixtal found himself manning a secondary weapons console next to engineer Amy Foster. The young human female had burns on her, arms from working with overloaded power systems, but she continued operating her station without complaint. Her determination was both inspiring and terrifying. "Power coupling on Deck 12 just failed," Foster reported. "Switching to backup systems, but we are losing efficiency in the port defensive grid. If they concentrate their attacks on that sector, we will not be able to hold them off much longer." The tactical situation continued to deteriorate as more enemy ships joined the attack. The Seeker of Truth was taking damage faster than repair. Teams could fix it. Several weapon systems had been destroyed and hull breaches were appearing in multiple locations. The end seemed inevitable. But something strange was happening to the Kethvar crew. Instead of surrendering to despair, they were beginning to fight with the same desperate courage they saw in their human allies. Beings who had never fired weapons, in anger, were now defending their ship with a determination that surprised even themselves. The breakthrough came when the Ravengers made their first serious mistake. Confident that the defenders were nearly beaten, they sent a massive assault transport to dock with the main hull. The plan was to overwhelm the remaining crew with boarding teams and capture the ship intact for their fleet. Captain Martinez had been waiting for exactly this moment. "All teams to boarding defense positions," he announced over the ship communication system. "This is what we trained for. Remember that every Ravenger we stop here is one less threat to innocent beings throughout the galaxy." Zixtal watched the internal sensors as armed Ravenger warriors began cutting through the hull. Within minutes, hundreds of brutal aliens would be loose inside the ship, hunting for survivors. The logical response would be to retreat to secure areas and hope for rescue that would never come. Instead, the mixed human and Kethvar crews formed defensive lines in the corridors leading to critical ship systems. They positioned themselves between the borders and the civilian areas where non-combat personnel were sheltering. Every defender knew they were probably about to die, but none of them considered retreating. The first group of Ravenger boarders broke through the hull and immediately came under concentrated fire from positions they had not expected to be defended. The surprise gave the defenders a temporary advantage, but everyone knew it would not last long against superior numbers and better equipment. Zixtal realized that his entire understanding of courage and fear had been wrong. True bravery was not the absence of terror, but the choice to act despite being terrified. The humans had taught him that some things were worth dying for, even when death seemed certain. The corridors of the Seeker of Truth became a battlefield unlike anything Zixtal had ever imagined. Ravenger boarding teams poured through multiple hull breaches, while human and Kethvar defenders fought desperate holding actions at every intersection. The air filled with the sounds of energy weapons and the screams of wounded beings from both sides. Zixtal found himself crouched behind an overturned cargo container next to Lieutenant Susan Park, a human communications officer who had never seen combat before her ship was destroyed. Her hands shook as she fired the unfamiliar Kethvar energy rifle, but she never retreated from her position, even when Ravenger warriors charged directly toward their defensive line. "Stay calm and pick your targets," Park whispered to a young Kethvar beside her who was frozen with terror. "These creatures rely on fear to win their battles. If we refuse to be afraid, they lose their biggest advantage." The first major breakthrough came when a group of Ravenger heavy assault troops smashed through the defenses on Deck 9. These massive warriors wore thick armor and carried weapons that could punch through ship bulkheads. Normal defensive tactics would have been useless against such overwhelming force. But Chief Gary Stone had other ideas. The grizzled human maintenance worker led a mixed team of humans and Kethvar in a flanking attack through the ship's service tunnels. They emerged behind the Ravenger assault troops and caught them completely by surprise with close-range weapons fire. "Hit them hard and fast, then fall back to the next position," Stone called out as his improvised team engaged the enemy. "We cannot match their firepower, but we can make them pay for every meter of corridor they take." The fighting was brutal and personal in the narrow ship passages. Zixtal watched human defenders throw themselves at Ravenger warriors twice their size armed, with nothing but determination and desperation. Maintenance worker Pete Johnson tackled a massive alien brute who was advancing toward a group of wounded Kethvar civilians hiding in a storage compartment. Johnson knew he could not win against such a powerful opponent, but he fought anyway to buy time for others to escape. The human absorbed terrible punishment before finally falling, but his sacrifice allowed the civilians to reach safety. His last words were a warning about more enemies approaching from the port corridor. Dr. Wong had established her main medical station in the central hub, where she could reach casualties from all parts of the ship. The human doctor worked without rest, treating injuries that would have horrified medical personnel from peaceful species. Her steady hands and calm voice provided hope to beings who had given up on survival. "Bring him here quickly," Wong called, out as another wounded defender was carried toward her station. "That chest wound needs immediate attention, but he will survive if we can stop the bleeding." Medic Carol Adams ran through active combat zones to reach injured crew members who could not make it to the medical stations. The young human female crawled through debris and smoke to drag wounded Kethvar to safety while energy beams flashed overhead. Her courage inspired alien beings who had never seen such selfless dedication. The turning point in the boarding battle came when the Ravengers attempted to take control of the ship's engineering section. If they could capture the power core, they would be able to shut down all defensive systems and force a complete surrender. A massive force of enemy warriors advanced toward the critical area, expecting minimal resistance. But engineer Amy Foster had prepared a surprise for them. Working with Kethvar technicians, she had rigged the power conduits with feedback charges that would overload any unauthorized access attempts. When the Ravengers tried to interface with the engineering controls, the entire section exploded in a chain reaction of electrical fires. Foster was caught in the blast and severely injured by the electrical feedback, but her trap worked perfectly. The entire Ravenger assault team was either killed or incapacitated, and the ship's power systems remained under friendly control. As medical teams rushed to treat her injuries, she managed to whisper instructions for keeping the engines running. Captain Martinez had been moving through the ship, coordinating the various defensive actions and providing leadership wherever it was needed most. The human commander seemed to be everywhere at once, encouraging frightened defenders and organizing counterattacks against Ravenger breakthrough attempts. When a group of enemy warriors reached the bridge area, Martinez personally led the team that stopped them. Armed with a salvaged Ravenger weapon, he fought alongside Kethvar crew members who had discovered courage they never knew they possessed. His tactical experience and steady leadership turned a potential disaster into a defensive victory. "Every position we hold makes their job harder," Martinez explained to the mixed defenders. "They expected to capture this ship quickly with minimal losses. The longer we make them fight for every corridor, the more likely their commanders will decide we are too expensive to be worth the effort." Sergeant Rivers had established a mobile reserve force that moved throughout the ship, responding to enemy breakthroughs wherever they occurred. The experienced human soldier led Kethvar defenders, who had transformed from peaceful explorers into determined warriors in just a few hours of combat. Rivers was leading a counterattack to retake the main cargo bay when a Ravenger plasma cannon caught him in its blast radius. The sergeant was mortally wounded, but he continued directing his team's assault until the enemy position was overrun. As he lay dying, he handed his weapon to a young Kethvar technician. "Do not let them win," Rivers whispered with his final breath. "There are innocent beings throughout the galaxy counting on people like us to stand between them and monsters like these." The words hit Zixtal like a physical blow as he realized the true meaning of what was happening. This was not just a battle for one ship or one crew. It was a fight between two completely different philosophies about what intelligent beings owed each other. The Ravengers represented the brutal logic of predators who took whatever they wanted from weaker beings. The humans represented something else entirely. They believed that strength should be used to protect others, not to exploit them. They were willing to die to defend that principle, even when the beings they protected were complete strangers. As the boarding battle continued to rage throughout the ship, Zixtal began to understand why the humans fought with such desperate courage. They were not just defending their own lives. They were defending the idea that civilization meant more than just advanced technology and comfortable safety. The Ravenger boarding assault began to stall as their casualties mounted, and their easy victory turned into a grinding battle of attrition. For the first time in their military history, they were facing defenders who refused to break no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. Enemy commanders started receiving reports that made no sense according to their understanding of warfare. Small groups of defenders were holding positions that should have been overrun hours earlier. Wounded beings were continuing to fight long after they should have surrendered. The mathematics of conquest that had worked against hundreds of other species was failing against these strange creatures who made death itself afraid. The aftermath of the boarding battle left the Seeker of Truth scarred, but not broken. Zixtal moved through corridors filled with debris and emergency lighting, helping to search for survivors and assess the damage. The ship had held against impossible odds, but the cost had been terrible for both sides. Dr. Wong worked in the main medical bay, surrounded by wounded beings from multiple species. Human and Kethvar casualties lay side by side, receiving treatment without regard for their origins. Even some captured Ravager warriors were being treated for their injuries despite the brutal nature of their attack. Medical care is for everyone, Wong explained to a confused Kethvar nurse who questioned treating enemy wounded. The moment someone stops fighting, they become a patient, not a threat. That is what separates us from monsters. Amy Foster survived her electrical injuries, but the damage was severe enough that she would carry permanent scars as reminders of her sacrifice. The young engineer insisted on returning to work as soon as she could walk, refusing to let her injuries prevent her from helping with ship repairs. "We are not finished yet," Foster told the medical staff who wanted her to rest. "That Ravager fleet is still out there and they will not give up easily. This ship needs every person working if we want to survive the next attack." The human assessment proved accurate when long-range sensors detected the enemy fleet regrouping for another assault. The first boarding attempt had failed, but the Ravengers still had overwhelming numerical superiority. Logic suggested they would simply wear down the defenders through repeated attacks until resistance finally collapsed. Captain Vorthak called a meeting of all senior officers to discuss their options. The Kethvar commander had been changed by the experience of combat in ways that surprised even himself. Where once he would have sought diplomatic solutions, he now spoke of tactical preparations and defensive strategies. "The next attack will be larger and more coordinated," Vorthak explained to the assembled group. "Our defensive systems have been damaged, and we have lost nearly 30% of our crew. By any reasonable calculation, we cannot survive another major assault." Captain Martinez studied the damage reports and tactical displays with the calm focus that had impressed Zixtal from their first meeting. The human commander seemed to see possibilities where others saw only problems. "Captain, you are thinking like prey animals," Martinez said respectfully. "Ravengers expect their enemies to wait passively for the next attack. They do not expect their victims to take the initiative and strike first." The idea of launching an offensive action against a superior enemy force seemed insane to most of the Kethvar officers. But as Martinez explained his plan, Zixtal began to see the brutal logic behind the human approach to warfare. "Their command ship is the key to their entire operation," Martinez continued. "Ravager fleets depend on centralized control to coordinate their attacks. If we can disable or destroy that vessel, the rest of their ships will lose tactical cohesion." The plan was dangerous beyond anything the Kethvar had ever contemplated. A small team would use the ship's remaining shuttlecraft to approach the enemy command vessel under cover of sensor jamming. If they could board the Ravager flagship and plant explosives in critical systems, the resulting chaos might give the Seeker of Truth a chance to escape. Volunteers for the mission stepped forward immediately. Both humans and Kethvar crew members offered to join the desperate assault despite knowing it was essentially a suicide mission. The transformation of his peaceful people into warriors willing to sacrifice everything amazed Zixtal more than any technical achievement. Chief Stone led the preparation of equipment and weapons for the assault team. The tough human worked with Kethvar engineers to modify explosives and boarding tools for use aboard an enemy warship. His practical knowledge of ship systems made the impossible mission slightly less hopeless. Remember that Ravenger ships are built for intimidation as much as function, Stone explained to the mixed assault team. Their corridors are wider than necessary, and their systems are designed to impress prisoners. Use that against them by moving fast and hitting targets they do not expect. The shuttle launched during a lull between enemy attack waves when the Ravenger fleet was repositioning for their next assault. Pilot Dan Collins flew the small craft through the debris field left by earlier battles, while the jamming systems hid their approach from enemy sensors. Zixtal was part of the assault team and felt his courage wavering as they approached the massive enemy command ship. The Ravenger vessel was 10 times larger than anything he had ever seen and bristled with weapons designed to destroy entire planets. The idea of boarding such a monster seemed like madness, but the humans showed no signs of doubt or fear as they prepared their equipment. Martinez checked his weapons while Stone reviewed the ship schematics they had captured from Ravenger databases. Their confidence was infectious and gradually spread to the Kethvar team members. Once we are inside, move fast and stick together, Martinez instructed the team as they prepared to dock with the enemy ship. Ravengers rely on superior numbers, but they are not expecting boarders. Surprise is our biggest advantage, and we cannot waste it. The boarding action succeeded beyond their most optimistic hopes. The Ravenger command crew was so focused on planning their next attack that security around their own ship had been reduced to minimal levels. The assault team reached the critical systems areas before alarms even began to sound. Stone and Foster worked together to plant explosive charges throughout the enemy ship's command and control centers, while the rest of the team provided security. The charges were set to detonate simultaneously and destroy the centralized coordination systems that held the Ravenger fleet together. But the mission nearly failed when a Ravenger security patrol discovered them during the final phase of the operation. A running battle erupted through the enemy ship's corridors as the assault team fought to reach their escape shuttle before the explosives detonated. Martinez was wounded during the fighting, but continued leading his team toward safety. The human commander refused medical attention until everyone else was safely aboard the shuttle. His dedication to his people impressed even the Revenger warriors who were trying to kill him. The explosives detonated just as the shuttle cleared the enemy ship's docking bay. The massive Revenger command vessel broke apart in a chain reaction of secondary explosions that lit up space for thousands of kilometers. Without their coordination center, the enemy fleet immediately fell into confusion and disarray. Some Ravenger ships tried to continue the attack on their own initiative, but without centralized control, their efforts became uncoordinated and ineffective. Other vessels began withdrawing from the battle area as their commanders decided the mission had become too costly to continue. The most significant development came when intercepted. Enemy communications revealed something unprecedented in Ravenger military history. For the first time, their commanders were expressing doubt about attacking a specific target. The brutal raiders who had conquered dozens of worlds were actually afraid of a single damaged exploration ship. Zixtal listened to the translated Ravenger communications with amazement. Enemy officers were reporting that their opponents fought like beings possessed by madness. They described humans as creatures that seemed to welcome death in battle, and Kethvar as aliens who had somehow learned to fight with the same desperate courage. One Ravenger fleet commander sent a message to his superiors that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. These beings do not fight like any warriors we have encountered. They fight like cornered animals, but with the intelligence of advanced species. They cannot be intimidated because they have already accepted their own deaths. How do you defeat an enemy that considers dying for others a victory? The question had no answer in Ravenger military doctrine, and the surviving enemy ships began withdrawing from the system. For the first time in their brutal history, they had encountered defenders who refused to be conquered no matter what the cost. 3 months after the battle, Zixtal stood in the rebuilt observation deck of the Seeker of Truth, watching a joint patrol of human and Kethvar vessels prepare for departure. The integration of their technologies had created ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. HFY engineering combined with human tactical thinking produced defensive systems that could protect entire star systems from raiders. Amy Foster had become the chief liaison between human and HFY technical teams. Despite her permanent scars from the electrical burns, she worked with enthusiasm that impressed everyone around her. The young engineer had helped develop new shield technologies that could adapt to multiple threat types in real time. The key was understanding that defense is not just about absorbing damage, Foster explained to a group of mixed-species technicians. Human military thinking taught us that the best defense sometimes requires taking aggressive action against threats before they can organize coordinated attacks. The story of their battle had spread throughout HFY space and beyond. For the first time in their peaceful history, the HFY had established military alliances with other species, not for conquest or territorial expansion, but for the protection of innocent beings who could not defend themselves against predators. Dr. Wong had established the first joint medical training program between their species. Human field medicine techniques combined with HFY healing technology created treatment methods that could save lives in conditions that would have been hopeless before. Her work was already being used to train medical teams throughout both civilizations. Combat medicine teaches you that every second counts when someone is dying, Wong told her mixed classes of human and HFY students. Traditional medical approaches focus on careful diagnosis and gradual treatment. Sometimes you need to act immediately based on limited information and accept the risks involved. Captain Martinez had been promoted to admiral and placed in charge of the new Joint Defense Fleet. The human commander worked with Captain Vorthak to develop strategies that combined HFY exploration capabilities with human combat experience. Their partnership had become a model for cooperation between different species. The most significant change was in the HFY themselves. Beings who had spent centuries avoiding dangerous situations were now volunteering for missions to protect vulnerable colonies from raider attacks. They had learned that some things were worth fighting for, even when fighting meant accepting terrible risks. Zixtal had been assigned as cultural exchange officer responsible for studying humanity and helping his people understand their new allies. What he had learned challenged every assumption about evolution intelligence and the nature of civilization itself. Humans are not more advanced than us in traditional ways, Zixtal wrote in his official report. Their technology is simpler and their society is less organized, but they retained something we lost during our development toward peaceful civilization. They kept the courage to fight for others even when victory seemed impossible. The Ravengers had largely withdrawn from regions where human and HFY forces operated together. Intelligence reports suggested that the brutal raiders were genuinely afraid of encountering the species that had made death itself retreat. Other aggressive civilizations had also become more cautious about attacking targets that might include human defenders. But the most important change was philosophical rather than military. The HFY had always believed that advanced intelligence naturally led to peaceful behavior and logical problem-solving. The humans proved that intelligence could also choose courage over safety and sacrifice over survival. Pete Johnson had survived his injuries and become a symbol of ordinary beings, doing extraordinary things. The quiet maintenance worker was now training mixed teams of humans and HFY in damage control techniques that could keep ships fighting even after suffering catastrophic damage. Anyone can be brave when they have advantages and superior equipment, Johnson told his students. Real courage happens when you have every reason to give up, but you choose to keep fighting anyway. That is what separates defenders from victims. The joint patrols were already having effects beyond their immediate areas of operation. Pirate groups throughout the region were avoiding territories where they might encounter the new Alliance fleets. The reputation of beings who fought like humans but had access to HFY technology was spreading faster than the actual ships. Zixtal received regular reports about Ravenger communications intercepted by intelligence services. The enemy discussions revealed a level of uncertainty that had never existed before in their military planning. They were actually conducting detailed assessments of target worlds to determine if humans might be present before launching attacks. 1. Intercepted message summarized the new reality perfectly. Recommend avoiding any system where human presence is confirmed or suspected. These beings demonstrate tactical unpredictability combined with acceptance of casualties that make conventional conquest strategies ineffective. Suggest targeting worlds with traditional defensive approaches until countermeasures can be developed. The irony was not lost on Zixtal. The most feared predators in the galaxy were now afraid of the smallest and seemingly weakest members of the Alliance. Humans had taught both their allies and their enemies that physical strength meant nothing compared to moral courage. Captain Vorthek had become an advocate for expanding the Alliance to include other peaceful species who wanted to learn how to defend themselves. The HFY commander, who once avoided all dangerous situations, was now actively seeking ways to spread the human philosophy of protective courage throughout the galaxy. We spent so long believing that intelligence meant avoiding conflict that we forgot why conflict is sometimes necessary, Vorthak explained to a gathering of allied species representatives. The humans reminded us that the highest form of intelligence is knowing what is worth fighting for and having the courage to fight when fighting is required. In his final report as cultural exchange officer, Zixtal attempted to summarize what he had learned about humanity and its impact on galactic civilization. The task was difficult because the changes went far beyond military tactics or technology. Standing with humans in battle was my first encounter with real fear, he wrote. I thought I understood terror when I saw the Ravager fleet approaching our ship. But true fear came when I realized that humans, these fragile, short-lived beings, possessed something we advanced species had lost along our path to civilization. The observation deck where Zixtal completed his report overlooked the departure of another joint patrol heading toward contested space. Human and HFY crews worked together aboard ships that represented the best of both civilizations. They were not looking for fights, but they were prepared to fight when fighting would protect innocent beings. They retained the primal courage of their ancestors while gaining the wisdom to know what is worth dying for. Zixtal concluded his report. Walking beside them toward tomorrow has been my first encounter with real hope. The patrol ships engaged, their hyperspace drives, and disappeared into the vast darkness between stars. Somewhere in that darkness, other beings were waiting for rescue or protection from predators who had always been able to take whatever they wanted from weaker species. But the galaxy was changing. Word was spreading that there were defenders now who would not retreat no matter how hopeless the odds appeared. Beings who understood that some things were more important than survival and that courage was contagious when it was demonstrated by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Zixtal closed his report and looked out at the stars, wondering what other changes were coming. The alliance between humans and HFY was just the beginning. Soon, other species would have to choose between the old ways of avoiding conflict and the new path of standing together against those who preyed on the innocent. The age of easy conquest was ending. The age of protective courage was just beginning.